Hello everybody, Toreno here, and welcome back to another episode of War Thunder, or more specifically the devblog article of War Thunder, announcing the introduction of British tanks to, well, ground forces. Three have been announced, the Comet, Churchill and the Centurion. Now, these have been announced at a bit of a busy time for myself, so this video isn't going to be as long as I'd like it to be. I'll go into as much detail as I can. If I need to, I'll do a follow-up episode if I need to. But I'll try and go into as much detail in this episode as I can. Now, reading through the dev blog, we don't actually get that much information. It's just basically saying that British vehicles have been announced. The only really interesting bit is that it talks about unique vehicles of which no counterpart anywhere else in the world could match, produced by Britain. Maybe that's referring to some of the more unique vehicles such as the Tog, maybe some of the early Churchills that had howitzers in the hull. Not much out of those three paragraphs, but, just throwing that out there. Now, the first vehicle they talk about is the medium cruiser tank A34 Comet. Now, this is interesting because it calls it a medium and a cruiser, so it seems likely they're going to sort of split the line in, well, they're going to have at least two lines, it seems. A medium cruiser line, so medium tanks / cruiser tanks, and heavy infantry tanks. So that's probably how they're going to do it. They're probably going to have one line for infantry tanks and one line for cruiser tanks. And then possibly more lines for tank destroyers, light tanks, self-propelled anti-aircraft, etc., etc. Now, the Comet was a rather late addition to the British Army. It was introduced right at the end of World War II. Going through my book, the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Military Vehicles, it was introduced in, I think, 1944, late 1944, early 1945. It was used in combat in March of 1945, but by this time the war was basically over, so there wasn't much for it to do. But it was armed with a 77mm gun, which I believe was a modified 17-pounder, sort of, to fit better in the turret. The original 17-pounders were quite big weapons. Armour was, it was relatively thin for the era. It was 14 to 101mm, which for a 1945 tank wasn't particularly brilliant. Speed was about 31 miles an hour, which, it was a cruiser tank. That was its main role, to be fast and manoeuvrable. So it seems to have done its job quite well with regards to mobility, but speed, armour maybe not the best, but it had a pretty good gun. And at the end of the day, if it needed to be fast, it wasn't meant to go toe-to-toe with enemy vehicles. Now, reading from the description given in the dev blog, it says it was 33 tons, and its firepower was greater than the firepower of any other Allied medium tank at the time. And the only vehicle it was comparable to was the Sherman Firefly, which was inferior in all characteristics except the cannon's penetration. As I said, that the gun on the Comet was a modified 17-pounder gun, which was a bit smaller barrel rise, I believe. The Comet was upgraded and modified to fit the 17-pounder anti-tank cannon. What else does it say? The armour on the vehicle turret was improved, while the chassis was taken from the Cromwell tank. In-game, the vehicle shows its strengths against opponents at rank 3 and 4. So it's going to be a low tier 4 or high tier 3 tank from the sounds of it, which I would hope it'd be tier 4 since it did enter service right at the end of the war. But as it says later on in the paragraph, the tankers should not rely on armour protection, as the non-sloped armour may lead to poor survivability. And at the end it says you should use mobility and cannon performance to turn it into a dangerous hunter against enemy tanks and self-propelled guns behind enemy lines. So this is a pretty good tank. I hope it would be tier 4, because lower than that seems a bit unfair. But it's very good they've added this tank in. I think it will be a pretty effective tank, but you will have to take advantage of its mobility and not rely on its armour. Possibly play a bit like some of the early German tanks, which have extremely good guns but bad armour. And like I say, it's a very good very good tank that to be added into the game. Now, going back to the devblog article, we've got the heavy infantry tank Churchill Mark III. Now, this was a later model. The earlier models had howitzers in the hull, and sometimes howitzers in the turret, and the tank gun in the hull. But this is sort of where they sort of started to standardise it, got rid of the hull gun. They added the 57mm 6-pounder. Now, the Churchill tank was very heavily armoured. It had about 102mm armour maximum thickness, although I think this varied depending on various models. Some of the later ones went up to 152mm, and it was pretty slow. It only did something like 16 miles per hour. This was a very slow tank, and you can sort of see it sort of bears a slight resemblance to some of the tanks used in World War One. The big high tracks, except it's got the turret on it, while the World War One tanks obviously didn't. Now, reading the paragraph again, it describes the Churchill as a legendary British infantry support tank, and that it was a successful design with excellent armour protection, which was further enhanced as the vehicle was modernised. As I said, this was, it's changed as newer models were introduced. Now, it mentions that it was even took part in the Battle of Kursk and the Korean War, so maybe hinting at certain premium vehicles or events, although I don't know how it could fit into Korea against T-34-85s, unless it's a later model. And the paragraph does confirm for us that the Mark III was equipped with a 6-pounder 57mm anti-tank gun. Now, interestingly, this gun is already in the game. It's in the premium vehicle, the Su-57, as the M1 cannon, which is basically an American-built 6-pounder gun. I think the only difference was some slight production methods. It was basically the same gun. Now, the in-game 57mm 6-pounder gun on the Su-57 with normal armour piercing does at 0 degrees 10 metres 136mm of penetration, and at 2000 metres at 0 degrees it does 62. So, it's a pretty good gun, pretty powerful gun, so, it should do pretty well at certain tiers. However, reading the paragraph of the Churchill a bit more, it says that it may be lacking penetration to combat some enemy vehicles on medium to far distances, and thus the Churchill has to adapt its tactics by steadily approaching the enemy and attacking from a short distance. Whether that's hinting that it'll be a higher tier vehicle, because the 6-pounder was a pretty good gun. I don't know why it would struggle that much. I mean, at 500 metres at 0 degrees, T-34-85 only has something like 10mm more penetration. That's a tier 4 vehicle, so I'm hoping they're not going to put the battle rating really high. Now, interestingly, at the end of the paragraph, it says, at the same time, the Churchill can provide cover to nearby Allied vehicles using its massive hull. I'm not sure positioning yourself to take shots aimed at friendly allies is a good idea, but maybe that just gives a hint at how big this tank actually is. Now, going back to the devblog article one last time, we've got the medium tank Centurion Mark III. Now, you'll notice it says medium tank, but not cruiser tank, as with the Comet tank up the top here. And the reason for this is it was basically superior to the infantry tanks and the cruiser tank. It had the manoeuvrability of a cruiser tank, but with the armament and armour of a infantry tank. I believe they called it the universal tank. And it's basically like the forerunner to the main battle tanks that we have today. Now, as with the Churchill tank, there was a variety of different models. There was a model with the 17-pounder gun, one with the 20-pounder gun, the Mark III that we're getting in the game, and they introduced the, there was a variant in the future, I can't quite remember which variant, I believe it was a Mark V, I could be wrong, but it got the 105mm gun. That is actually in-game on the M60 and the Leopard 1. If I remember correctly, even some of the early versions of the Abrams tank had the 105mm gun. So, this was a pretty good gun. The armour was also pretty good, at about 17 to 152mm of armour, and speed was about 21 to 22 miles per hour, so pretty quick as well, with a very good gun and with very good armour. Now, reading through the paragraph in the dev blog, and it is a pretty short paragraph, it mentions that it's the third modification of the British Centurion tank, hence the Mark III, and it's armed with the 20-pounder gun, which is an 83.8mm caliber weapon. Now, it says it was a unique vehicle in that it was based on the 88mm KWK-43 cannon, but it then goes on to say that it was the first cannon to feature sabot rounds, which I'm pretty sure is wrong. I'm pretty sure it was one of the earlier designs, the 17-pounder or even the 6-pounder possibly. I'm pretty sure it was the 6-pounder was the first to actually use sabot rounds, so maybe the bit about the 88mm cannon is wrong as well. And it goes on to say it was too late to actively participate in World War II, but proved its effectiveness in the Korean War and Vietnam. Again, possibly hinting at potential future events for it to be featured in. Now, very interestingly, it says this vehicle would take its rightful place at rank 4. And it will be a worthy opponent of the late modifications of the Panther and the T-44. Now, this seems very, very under-tiered for me. I'm hoping the battle rating is going to be a lot higher. it seems odd that it'll be using a post-war gun from 1948, and according to the article, based on a German World War II weapon, to fight vehicles that are from World War II. It strikes me as very, very odd. I do hope that was maybe a mistype, or they're going to reconsider that, or like I said, it has a high battle rating. Because it's got ridiculously, well, pretty good armor. It's got a ridiculously good gun. Yeah, that seems very odd to me. Although, then again, one of the reasons they got rid of the 20-pounder was it couldn't stand up to T-54, so maybe the gun isn't as good as I thought it would be. So we'll have to see how that turns out. It does seem very surprising to me, at least. But anyway, that's it for this episode. I do apologise it's been so short and not as in-depth as my previous videos. Like I said, it's come at a bit of a busy time, this announcement. I do implore you to check out my proposed British tank tech tree, where I go in more depth about these vehicles, talk about the history, armament, armour, speed, what other vehicles there are on the British tank tech trees. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like if you did. Leave feedback. I can always do with more feedback. Subscribe if you like these sorts of videos. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.